You probably know the story of the guy who sells his soul to the devil, right? But what you might not know is how that classic story was cranked up to 11 during the Renaissance. It was totally transformed, becoming this incredibly powerful moral warning for its time. And that's what we're going to break down today, that specific, super high-stakes version of the Faustian bargain. Okay, so it all comes down to the deal itself. I mean, that's the whole story. But to really get how this allegory was supercharged for a brand new era, we've got to go back to the beginning. We need to look at the original blueprint. So, where did this whole idea of a deal with the devil really start?
Well, it all kicks off with a German text from 1587, which is known simply as the Faust book.
Yeah, this is basically ground zero for the whole story. The Faust book of 1587 is the OG text, the one that first wrote down the rules for the diabolical pact. It's the critical baseline for every single version that came after it, from Marlowe all the way to Goethe. This is really where the legend was born.
And you know what? Its purpose was crystal clear. They were not subtle about it. The story was designed from the ground up to be an unambiguous cautionary tale. The message was super simple. Don't let your pride, your hubris, lead you off the righteous path. Why? Because the consequences are dire and they are absolute. So, this original text did way more than just tell a spooky story. It created this incredibly durable blueprint, It laid the foundation and set the stage for a literary evolution that would turn the Faust myth into one of the most lasting stories in all of Western culture. But that blueprint was about to get a major, very specific upgrade. And that brings us to an age of really anxious faith, the very thing that would reforge the Faust story into something new. So the story gets pulled out of its kind of general moral context and is dropped right smack in the middle of Reformation-era Germany. We're talking about the time of Martin Luther here, a period of just insane spiritual crisis and intense theological and social upheaval. I mean, the very ground was shaking under people's feet, and their faith was being tested like never, ever before. And this whole environment created what you could call a perfect storm of spiritual anxiety. People were wrestling with this really high-stakes, existential dissatisfaction. They were just intensely worried about their own salvation, about grace and damnation. The old certainties from the church, gone. And instead, there was this extreme focus on eternal judgment. This was the exact audience for a new, intensified Faust.
So the story was totally recalibrated. Its new purpose wasn't just to warn people, but to actively fortify the faith and ethical resolve of its readers. It basically became a tool, almost like a piece of spiritual armor, designed specifically for these turbulent, anxious times.
Now, to pull this off, the story's main characters had to be completely reforged for this new era. So let's talk about the sinner and the tempter.
The new Faust wasn't just some random sinner. He was based on what the source material here calls the Rasputin blueprint, that archetype of a charismatic but corrupting influencer. Think of a brilliant scholar, maybe even a disillusioned cleric of the time, who's already kind of dabbling in forbidden knowledge. He's already operating in that ambiguous spiritual territory, which makes him the absolute perfect target.
And his tempter Mephistopheles? He got an upgrade too. He wasn't just some monster with horns. This version is a master of psychological sophistication. He uses his wit and just incredible rhetorical skill, acting less like a beast and more like a cunning intellectual guide, perfectly ready to exploit the deepest anxieties of his target.
And what's so brilliant is how the tempter's strategy perfectly matches the sinner's vulnerability. It's like a lock and key. On one side, you've got Faust, who is just crippled by this intense anxiety about damnation and is full of intellectual pride. And on the other side, you have the tempter offering the perfect cure, the illusion of completeness, this promise of unrestricted freedom from all the rules of the church. It's a perfectly laid, completely self-destructive trap.
Which brings us right to the heart of the story, the pact itself. And probably the best way to think about it in this context is as the ultimate bad loan.
At its very core, the diabolical pact is presented as a clear and non-negotiable spiritual transaction. This isn't just a gimmick to move the plot forward. It's the moral engine of the entire allegory. Think of it like a business deal, with terms and conditions that are absolutely 100% binding.
And the terms of that deal are devastatingly simple. On one hand, Faust gets all the worldly stuff, Forbidden knowledge, earthly pleasures, supernatural powers, you name it. But the price he pays is the complete and irreversible surrender of his soul, a piece of collateral that is infinitely more valuable than anything he gets in return. And right there, that reveals the catastrophic imbalance at the very heart of the deal. Faust is trading a finite, temporary period of gain here on Earth for an infinite, eternal duration of damnation. The math is just horrifying, and that is exactly the point. And to make this warning hit even harder, the temptations themselves got an update. Hubris, or intellectual pride, became the pursuit of ultimate Gnostic certainty, the forbidden desire for definitive knowledge of God's will. See, this wasn't just about being arrogant, it was a direct challenge to the Church's authority on Scripture, which was a huge deal during the Reformation. Carnal sin was reframed as this indulgence in courtly and material excess, and playing God became alchemical or prophetic mastery through black magic. Every single temptation was tailored to the specific fears and ambitions of a Renaissance audience. Which brings us right back to that powerful analogy, the pact as a dangerous high-interest loan. Mephistopheles isn't just some demon. In this version, he's the ultimate cynical banker of the human spirit. He offers you instant gratification, all the wealth and power you want, but he demands your soul as the ultimate, non-negotiable collateral. And just like any loan with impossible terms, this one can only end one way. Which brings us to the inevitable verdict: spiritual foreclosure. The whole story really forces you to confront this single, terrifying choice. It makes you weigh immediate gratification, all the power, the knowledge, the pleasures, against the eternal consequence. It's basically asking the reader, and us, what is the true price of these fleeting good times? And in this souped-up Renaissance version of the tale, the ending is non-negotiable. The story always, always ends with the tragic foreclosure of that spiritual debt. The soul gets collected. There are no loopholes, no second chances, no way out. And that is the stark, terrifying power of its moral warning. So that leaves us with a final thought to chew on. The Faust allegory was totally recalibrated to speak directly to the deepest anxieties of the 16th century. So, if we were to recalibrate it for today, what would that bargain look like? What, in our modern world, are the things we might be tempted to trade our souls for?